All right, Mayor, I understand you're traveling, so if you need help navigating the agenda, just
I
let me know.
would love to get started, and we're going to turn it over to council. Is that correct?
Correct.
Legal counsel. So why don't we get started?
First, officially, we need roll call. So if we can have the city clerk, acting city clerk, call the roll.
Councilmember Oliver.
Present.
Councilmember Fung.
Here.
Vice Mayor Pappen.
Here.
Mayor Oliva.
Here.
4 members of the city council are present. Councilmember Schneider is not present.
And then, Mayor, next we have on the agenda the Pledge of Allegiance. I believe I'll look to the city attorney. We could waive that, or is it necessary? Given everyone's proximity and traveling, right. I think we can waive that this morning.
Thank you.
And then, Mayor, so the other item on the agenda is existing business. Existing business item number 1 is consideration of an urgency ordinance establishing objective standards and affordability requirements for 2-unit residential developments and urban lot splits in single-family residential zones pursuant to Senate Bill 9. And if there are no questions, I will hand this over to our Community Development Director, Ms. Darcy Smith, for a quick presentation.
Good morning, everyone. I'm used to saying good evening, but it's morning. Can you hear me okay and see this presentation screen?
Perfectly.
Yeah, okay, great. Okay, so this is item number 1. It's the consideration of the urgency ordinance establishing objective standards and affordability requirements for 2-unit residential developments and urban lot splits in single-family residential zones pursuant to Senate Bill 9. And again, my name is Darcy Smith, your Community Development Director. So the meeting objective, as stated in the staff report, is for the City Council to consider adoption by a 4/5 vote of this urgency ordinance. And quick background, during your December 8th meeting, you directed city staff and the city attorney to prepare this urgency ordinance, which would establish very specific, focused interim regulations and affordability requirement for qualifying SB 9 projects. Under Government Code Section 65858, the city is expressly authorized to adopt, again by a 4/5 vote, this type of interim ordinance, and this is very specifically related to land use and zoning regulations that could be in conflict with contemplated general plan, specific plan, or in this case, a comprehensive zoning ordinance that's coming that the City Council intends to study within a reasonable time. You have to make very specific findings, and I'll step through those on another slide. And those findings document that this ordinance would be necessary for immediate preservation of public peace, health, and safety. You took action back in October to work on that comprehensive ordinance, and it was a budget authorization of $60,000, which I think shows you how much work would be involved, as well as community engagement to prepare that comprehensive zoning ordinance. Work is underway. We've kicked it off with the planning firm Placeworks, who's really skilled in working on these complex comprehensive zoning codes. And next year, we intend to go out to a community meeting, have joint Planning Commission City Council study session, ultimately then go back to Planning Commission, who reviews all zoning ordinances and makes recommendations to the council. But we do anticipate this will be about a 6-month process to finish this up, just because of the extensive work involved in a comprehensive zoning code. So quick SB 9 summary. It was signed into legislation by the governor back in September and will go into effect January 1. So the clock is ticking here. That really didn't give us enough time to prepare the comprehensive zoning ordinance. And so that's why in October you authorized the work and it's underway, but we're not ready before January 1. And most cities aren't. It's a huge amount of work to get that ready, as I mentioned previously. SB 9 essentially allows for the creation of up to 4 new dwelling units on a single family parcel. Again, it has to be zoned single family. We actually have had at least one inquiry here by someone wanting to do an SB 9 project on a duplex zone property. And again, it has to be zoned single family. That's in state law, and we can't change that locally. And there's a lot, extensive requirements in state law. Local governments like Millbrae can regulate it within the limits provided by state law. And what can essentially be built, I'll just step through this really quickly. It's essentially 2 homes on each of the two new lots. In some cases, a property owner may keep the existing home and build a second unit. We already see that now, such as for accessory dwelling units and junior accessory dwelling units. Under SB 9, a jurisdiction may choose to prohibit more units than the two. And any development is subject to objective rules. There's a caveat that the rules can't preclude more than 2 units that are 800 square feet of being developed. So this is a really nice slide that I showed you last meeting. And it just steps through, I think, not only the complexity of this law and the variations, but just a gist of what we're talking about, right? So a single family lot with 1 house on it now could add up to 2 units, could be split and have 4 units. And again, then the local jurisdiction has the ability to limit the addition of ADU and JADUs. And that's one thing that you directed us to look at. So the urgency ordinance, without any adopted ordinance locally in place, then we follow state law. And you might recall we did that with our ADU regulations for a period of time. The city took some time to get the ADU ordinance together, and that's typically what cities do while they're working on their locally adopted ordinance. This urgency ordinance puts in place these interim regulations, as I mentioned previously. And again, you document the findings of the urgency. So if you want to take a quick look at the recitals of the urgency ordinance, if you haven't already, I suggest you do that, because there's a lot of detail that city staff and the attorneys spend a lot of time working on. Really, it takes into consideration Millbrae's special conditions related to our unique single-family residential neighborhoods, which are largely up in our western hills and are at risk of landslides and other geologic hazards, and then our current affordable housing needs. In the recitals, we documented where we stand with our current RENA numbers, regional housing needs allocation, and where we are having some challenges around meeting those numbers. So the urgency ordinance itself, which I'll step through now, includes 4 primary policy objectives, again, as you directed to us on December 8th. The first one of those is the affordability requirement. We had a lot of discussion at that on December 8th. And what the urgency ordinance states is that if more than 1 SB 9 dwelling unit is developed on a single lot as either 1, an urban lot split, which those are very defined terms in state law and the urgency ordinance, so take a look at those if you haven't, or a 2-unit residential development, again, defined in state law and locally, then at least 1 SB 9 dwelling unit developed or constructed on each resulting parcel will be deemed to be an affordable SB 9 dwelling unit. That's at the low income affordability level and would remain deed restricted for 55 years through a covenant. So that's a primary piece of this urgency ordinance, and we can revisit this if you have questions to dive deeper into this specific provision. The second provision of the urgency ordinance is fairly simple. It's around objective setback standards. At the last meeting, I let you know that the city can enact local setback standards, otherwise the state prevails. So what the urgency ordinance states, consistent with state law, is that any SB 9 dwelling unit constructed shall have a minimum 4-foot setback from all rear and side lot lines. However, consistent with state law, this requirement does not apply to an SB 9 dwelling unit constructed in the same location and same dimensions as an existing legal dwelling. The last set of requirements are related to the number of units on each property, which we talked a lot about on December 8th. So the urgency ordinance states that no more than 2 primary dwelling units may be located on any lot created by the urban lot split. Accessory dwelling units and junior accessory dwelling units are not permitted. So again, that caps it at 2 rather than the 4, as you saw on the previous slide showing options. And each lot, again, must contain at least 1 affordable SB 9 dwelling unit. That's at the low income affordability level. In addition to those requirements, obviously any project would need to comply with our current objective standards set forth in our zoning code to the extent they don't conflict with SB 9. And then again, there's an affordability requirement, and only 2 dwelling units may be located on the parcel. So that's the simple summary. Again, the city attorney and city staff are happy to discuss it more, but the council action before you for consideration today is to adopt by the 4/5 vote this urgency ordinance. So that concludes presentation. You can go on to council questions.
Does anybody have any questions? Councilman Holliber?
Thank you. Actually, I don't really have any questions, but we would like to offer a friendly amendment if the council is willing to entertain that.
Can we hear Vice Mayor Pappin's comment
Sure.
first?
Sure.
Go ahead.
I'd really like to hear the amendment, please.
Okay, there you go. Ping pong.
Okay. So I discussed this offline with the city manager, and I think after hearing some of the public comments at the last meeting and concerns that we were not acting in good faith here, I think I'd like to propose that instead of requiring looking at the language here, at least one affordable unit on each resulting parcel, that we change the language to at least one affordable unit total between the two parcels. So that regardless, if somebody goes up to 4 total units, it's 1 out of 4. If they go from 1 to 2, it's 1 out of 2. If they go to 3, it's 1 out of 3. I think that's a little bit more reasonable, a little bit less onerous on homeowners, and makes it a little bit easier for these projects to pencil out, and shows we're acting in good faith here, yet want to make sure that these units are built on site and not just a fee that goes to potentially building other units at some point down the road. If the council's willing to entertain that. Thank you.
Vice Mayor Pappin.
Mayor, I hate to interrupt here. I just let the record reflect that Councilmember Schneider has joined the meeting,
Thank you.
8:48 a.m.
Welcome. Vice Mayor Pappin.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I think that's a very reasonable amendment. I have no problem with that at all. This is, to be clear, this helps us implement SB 9. So we're not trying to prevent that. I would like the record to show too that we have 488 housing units approved that high-speed rail is preventing from happening at this point in time. And the Anton project, how many housing units was that?
384.
384.
Yeah.
So for a city that's 3.2 square miles and a very small population, we have a vast majority of housing and will continue to do so where we can. This just helps us through the process. This isn't just an emergency ordinance, if I'm correct, and we will be completing our study moving forward. So I want the record to be very, very clear here. We are trying to work through this process, and we are also trying to provide badly needed housing. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Councilmember Schneider.
Thank you, Mayor, and my apologies for being late. Couple of questions on the resolution and the staff report. We get to consider areas that might be prone to earthquake, landslides, and liquefaction. The liquefaction was tied to earthquakes, but we also are now a tsunami zone, and we clearly have neighborhoods that flood. Do we get to consider tsunami and flooding in terms of the dangers for increasing density of housing?
That would be a question for community development. Darcy Smith, would you have that answer?
Yeah, so we didn't research the tsunami zones. We can do that. We certainly researched the other zones designated by state agencies. The flood zone is something we can look at too. I think the SB 9 has some provisions around properties that are in designated high-risk flood zones. I can take another look at that. But I think the city manager may know more about our existing flood zones that are mapped by FEMA and whether we have a lot of single-family residentially zoned properties in them. I think it's maybe a more minimal amount. But we can certainly look at that.
Yeah, I don't want to do anything that slows down our action today. I just, when I was reading the staff report last night, said we have at least 2 neighborhoods that are flood zone, 1 neighborhood that's in the tsunami zone, that's Bayside Manor. And then we've got Marina Vista that, with the transportation systems going through, is almost entirely cut off. So if we had to evacuate Merino Vista due to an airplane crash or a gas leak, a chemical leak from San Francisco, and the Anton project is built right there, you've got them trying to evacuate and an entire neighborhood, that's the only way in or out. I would, if you can look at that for the future, but not to hold up any action today.
Well, we don't, would it be, Councilmember Holliber, would you be opposed to adding that to your amendment?
No, not at all. I noticed that as well. I think we can just add that to the findings without
Yeah,
getting too much into detail, just that parts of the cities are affected by flood zones as well.
Perfect.
Flood and tsunami, given that we're a newly recognized tsunami zone.
Sure.
Thank you.
Vice Mayor Peppin.
Yeah, and I just do want to be very clear. We have had hillsides collapse. And so this is a very, very real concern for us. I just want to be very sure that that's in the record too. Thank you.
So by passing,
Mayor, I'm sorry, excuse me, along with what Vice Mayor Pappen said, we have had a neighborhood flood twice just in the last month. And Bayside Manor has flooded. And again, we're a new tsunami zone. So
yeah,
make sure that's in the record too.
Great point. So we'll add the flood zone and the tsunami to the amendment that Councilmember Holliber suggested. I guess my greatest concern was that we were going to rush into this, and already, in 4 or 5 days, we've come up with 2 adjustments. And by passing this today, it's very, if there's anything else that comes up in the next day, we don't have a choice to go back. Is that correct?
Well, what the comments that you are providing right now will be included in the record. We could do our best to research and confirm that these zones are in place. I mean, we want to be sure that whatever we write to our ordinance as an urgency finding is in fact correct. And so we will research. Darcy and I were looking at the records and trying to put in everything we could find that we could confirm. And we certainly may have overlooked this, and I'm sorry. So we will look at that, and we can write in an additional finding at your direction right now as an amendment with the caveat that we confirm that it is in fact in place.
Because I think where Councilmember Holliber brought this to council was, based upon Palo Alto, that's my guess. But we have to remember that we're unique. And I thank you, Councilmember Schneider, for pointing out those different areas that we are unique. So if anybody, can think of something else that comes up before it gets
right
done and complete.
And this is an urgency ordinance, which, as your community development director has advised, means that we are not going through our normal process, and we're getting it in place very quickly. And it is a land use measure. We will be looking at this again in 45 days. So it will be coming back to you in January, and we can modify it, take a fresh look at it then. But right now, we do want the record to be a strong one to support the need to rush to put in an urgency ordinance, and what we call them urgency findings that support the need to move forward now. And so I think that this all contributes to the strength of our urgency findings. And as you say, Mayor, we have to base our urgency findings on Millbrae and not Palo Alto or some other, we have to justify based on the features, the topography, the unique characteristics that pertain to Millbrae.
Thank you.
These are all good things. Can I respond to the friendly amendment from Councilmember Holliber? Because I actually heard you say that at the last meeting, Council, and I may have, and I think that we were a little too zealous in drafting this ordinance on the affordable units, because I remember hearing you tell me that you wanted one affordable unit per SB 9 project. Was that I remember asking you specifically what your intent was, and I think that's what you are now saying. If-
Correct. I think I brought it up at the previous meeting, but I don't know if I formally
Well,
requested that as an amendment or
I heard it.
suggested it.
I heard it. And so we were, as a staff, having discussions about what exactly was the desire of the council on this. So I hear what you're saying. I think what we would do is add a definition to the ordinance which defines SB 9 project. We will have a definition that defines SB 9 project. And then what we can do is, in the several places where it talks about the one affordable unit requirement, we will require one affordable unit per SB 9 project. So if someone comes in with a project to split the lot, the requirement will be that whatever they're placing on the two lots, one unit has to be affordable. I think I just want to be clear on the record, and we can make it clear in the ordinance. If that is your intent, we can follow up and make that very clear in the record.
That sounds good to me. Councilmember Holliver.
Yeah, that sounds good. That sounds very clear. Thank you. I did have one other quick question, if you don't mind. In terms of an urgency ordinance, does it have to be effective immediately, or can it be made effective January 1, in terms of when SB 9 goes into effect?
Well, technically, urgency ordinances go into effect immediately, but we certainly can say effective January 1.
And would that start the 45 days starting January 1?
No, the 45 days go into effect from the time you enact.
Okay, in that case, then just leaving it.
Yeah,
as
I
is.
don't think it makes that much difference.
Okay,
And
thank you.
in terms of our meeting schedule, we've gone ahead and counted days. And we're going to bring it back to you January 25th, which is a little shy of the 45 days, but no reason to have another special meeting. So we'll be fine.
Any other questions from council?
I do, Madam Mayor.
Perfect. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you. So I just wanted to be clear. There is a 3-year minimum owner occupy requirement upon invocation of SB 9. Is that correct, Bill?
Yes, that's correct for one of the units that's created.
Right.
Okay. And so how do we enforce that?
We require a declaration to be recorded stating that they'll reside on the property.
And council
We used to
member,
do these for ADUs. There was an era where this was allowed for ADUs, you might recall, and it was done through a deed restriction. And yeah, if we got a complaint, let's say, hey, it looks like there's renters there, which, can be kind of hard to prove, but the city can open a code enforcement case and investigate it and then enforce the deed restriction if we can document that the owner doesn't live there as their primary residence. It doesn't mean they couldn't travel and have a secondary residence, but it has to be their primary residence. And another way to check that is through tax records, right? If they're utilizing the homeowner's exemption on their taxes. But we've checked this in the past for ADUs when those laws were in effect.
Councilmember Fung, your point's well made. Can I just ask that we stay on topic to this emergency ordinance? Because you're absolutely correct. We're creating something that we might not be able to police, so to speak. But at this time, the emergency ordinance is not really how to put it into play, but rather to set the rules.
Well, I just wanted to understand that, if we have that requirement, it's my understanding that it is an intent to occupy rather than a deed restriction. Is that not right, Darcy?
I think I can research this more, but I think we might have the ability to require the deed restriction or another legal mechanism. We've talked about like affidavits and other items. We can research this more. These items we want to get in place January 1. But whether it's a deed restriction or a covenant, we're going to examine it more and find the best approach.
All right. And then the BMR requirement only, it is placed upon the second created deeded unit. Is that right? But if the second unit, if someone invoked SB9 without creating the second unit, without creating a second deeded unit, but rather just ADUs, would the BMR still required?
Well, so if they just create an ADU, that's completely different. So let's not
So-
confuse this too much. They would have to do an SB9 project, which as Ms. Castleman said, we're going to add a concise definition there. So it wouldn't be an ADU, it'd be an SB9 project, and they'd have to add that unit. And then as Councilmember Holber, directed, it's one unit that's created on a property.
In an
that would be
SB9 project.
restricted. Yeah.
Councilmember Fung, you are splitting your deeded property under SB9. When you do an ADU, you are not splitting the legal.
Nope, the parcels are the same on an ADU. The parcels are separate on SB9, parcel numbers. They get a separate address and legally two separate parcels.
Although I believe you could use SB9 to make two larger units on one parcel, right? That go beyond the scope of,
Yeah, but
beyond
it
the
would,
parameters of an ADU, right?
correct, but it would be two separate parcels and that one parcel would have two units.
If I may, I think the question for clarification here, does an SB9 application require the urban lot split?
And I
It does
think
not,
that
right?
SB9 without necessarily creating second deeded units.
Well, the deed of trust. Why would, no, that's not right, Anders. I don't believe that would be right. The deed of trust would be separate. On an ADU, it's not.
See,
On
on an
SB9,
the SB9 legislation gives you the flexibility of creating the second deeded unit, but it's
Right.
not a requirement.
but then that
You
would
could
not,
You could use SB9 for other purposes, like for example, skipping CEQA, skipping hearing, all the others.
well, I'm not quite sure.
Because SB9 does not require any more CEQA findings and review, and therefore hearing. And it strictly prohibit city from placing any subjective standards on these reviews. Is that correct, Joe?
That is correct. We can't place subjective requirements on these. And it is also correct that CEQA is not required for SB9 projects.
No hearing is required as part of that SB9.
That is correct. It is, we have a set of objective standards, some of which the council in the law, in the statute, and some of which you are now considering that would apply, but the SB projects would be approved administratively.
That means someone could theoretically use SB9 as a way to just eat through the approval process rather than creating a second unit.
Well, I think that's somewhat why Councilmember Oliver brought this to our attention. I mean, there's flaws, definite flaws in SB9. And to the extent we want to, your issue, I'm not so sure would be an emergency because that's been created, but how we can protect Millbrae, if you want to add something to protect that CEQA portion of it.
I'm not sure we can. I think that would be
Yeah.
changing the law.
Exactly.
We can't contravene what's in SB9, but we can supplement with objective standards.
So that's,
Sorry, Madam Mayor.
No.
I just want to be clear that it probably would be okay to create an emergency ordinance that place the BMR requirement only upon a secondly created deeded unit rather than the BMR, rather than placing BMR requirement on, say, the ADU that is created as part of the application. Would that make sense?
it's not making sense to me. So could you
Yeah,
try?
Councilmember Fung, ADU, I think, has a clear definition, right, in terms of, square footage and where it can be placed and whatnot. So I think under this ordinance, we would be prohibiting ADUs or junior ADUs
Okay.
in the case of an SB9 project.
Okay, so you would only allow the separately deeded unit to be created, but no more ADU to be created upon.
Well, that's
nine
that separate ADU units
Mhm.
cannot put in, it cannot be divided. Because
No,
it's, so
You can-
it wouldn't, so I
I
don't,
think
so only,
Community Development Director Smith had a good slide that showed all the different
Scenarios.
permutations of SB9.
Can you bring that back up, Darcy?
In our ADU, that's under different law. That's under a different section of the municipal code that is different than the SB9 provisions.
Can you see this slide?
yeah,
Yeah, but just a caveat that again, we are allowed under state law, and this urgency ordinance based on your direction would prohibit ADUs and ADUs from SB9 projects. So this is what the state law allows, absent local ordinance. But I think what we would be looking at, again, because you can keep the lot as it is and add a second SB9 unit, or you can split the lot into 2 lots and then have 4 units there. But none of them would be ADUs or JADUs under this urgency ordinance.
Second unit, even if it's on the same lot without the split, would not be an ADU. No. Okay.
Correct. But it would be a rental. So if I can just read a little bit into what Councilmember Fung is describing, is that it sounds like he's questioning imposing an affordability covenant on, I think, what could be a rental unit rather than
Yeah,
a
so-
for sale unit.
I just want to be absolutely clear in terms of how we're going to require that BMR unit. And it sounds like what I'm hearing is we are only requiring the BMR unit upon the creation of the second fully deeded unit, and only on that unit and not any other units.
I would strike the word fully deeded. It's any unit. It could be a rental, and then it becomes a rental affordable unit, which there's a need for rental affordable units, just as there's a need for ownership affordable units. And our ordinance doesn't distinguish between what would be a rental or what would be a for sale unit. And there are some provisions in SB9. We didn't step into that because again, it's really complicated around creating, I think, tenancies in common or condominium units, which then could be sold. But our affordability requirement, which is similar to the inclusionary requirement that you adopted, it's blind to whether it's a rental or an ownership unit, because again, there's need in the community. There's documented need for both.
Right, so I guess, I mean, obviously there's a lot of scenario, and that's why I want to be crystal clear. When you put in an SB9 application, you're creating a second separately subdivided unit. And that's the unit.
Not
that could-
always. It could not be subdivided. It could just be a rental unit on a single lot.
I see, without going through the subdivision process.
Correct. And that's sort of what you see here in B2. Add units, no lot split. Up to 2 units, 2 units being the SB9 units.
Okay, and that is the unit we will require BMR requirements.
Correct.
well, all of the way our emergency
Yeah.
ordinance is written, everything would, the affordable units would be in every one of these scenarios.
Only if you implement SB9 though. And
Exactly.
just to
Sorry.
clarify, because
Thank
I
you.
think the council member is saying, hey, if I build an ADU unit or junior ADU unit, this doesn't apply to, that's a
Right.
different section of our municipal code, and
Right.
different rules and local laws and state laws apply.
Okay, all right. Thank you.
Councilmember Fung, I hear all your points very clearly, and I think you're 100% right on with what you're trying to avoid, but we didn't write the law. So what we're trying to do here is just make it better for Millbrae.
Yeah, I think that certainly is. Go ahead, Gina.
I'm sorry, we need to get to public comment too.
Yeah, we do.
All right, let's open it up to public comment.
Can we do 2 minutes? I think the mayor's on a strict limit.
Don't do it for me. Let's just, yes, 2 minutes is fair enough, though. Please. Nathan Chan.
Hi, yes, thanks for the opportunity to speak to you on this important matter. In terms of the ordinance itself, I really think the council should reconsider the deed restriction portion of it. So in the text of the ordinance, there's a description of the need to provide affordable housing units. And to me, it's not clear that this provision will actually provide very many affordable units. For larger affordable housing projects, we have to do things like nexus studies and everything to understand exactly how many units and what percentages are affordable. This requirement seems to be being imposed on SB 9 projects without any sort of study of how feasible they are. And especially given the strict owner occupancy requirements of at least 3 years, the primary folks taking advantage of this are going to be homeowners who may not have the capital to fund a deed restricted unit for 55 years. And furthermore, based on the discussion that you all were asking, I think there's a lot of questions around how this deed restriction would apply. So let's say that single family homeowner decides to convert their unit to a duplex, and they want to be able to, and they occupy it for 3 years, and then they choose to sell it. How would the sale of that duplex now go forward? Is there a one half part of it that is a market rate and one half of it that's deed restricted to low income? Who would make the determination about which half gets sold, especially if the owner occupier of the original unit sells the deed restricted one? So these are questions that need answers before we pass this.
Thank you, Nathan. Do we have any other public comments? I'm looking here. I don't see any.
Yeah, Mayor, I do not believe there are any other public comments that we can see as well as staff.
So we could close public comments. Any other comments from council?
Yeah, I believe thank you, Nathan, as always. I believe the community development Darcy touched on that. This only applies to single, I don't know the terminology, single family units, not to duplex units, or can you clarify that again, please?
So duplex units are very different. They are built traditionally in the R2 zone, right? That's our duplex zoning. We should be very careful with our words here that we're referring to SB 9 projects. And again, while there's some provisions under state law, which we didn't get into, around creating, things like tenancies in common or condominiums, traditionally this would be one lot with 2 units. And each of those units one of the units would be owner occupied and one would be a rental unit. And so, and again, the ordinance states, and maybe I should pull up the slide with the ordinance language to be clear, that if more than one SB 9 dwelling unit is developed within a project, then that unit must be affordable. So I think you could have a homeowner who keeps their existing house, adds an SB 9 unit, and the affordability requirement isn't triggered. It would be if you're doing, you're adding, again, more than one SB 9 dwelling unit on a parcel. So let's just bring up that language, because I think, as you heard me say a few times and confirmed by the city attorney, this is really complicated legislation, and paraphrasing isn't our friend here. We're trying to make it simple. So let me just screen share one more time what it says. And then I also create a slide that I think captures what Councilmember Holabert requested as a slight amendment. But I think we should just step through this, because again, there is so much complexity here. So the ordinance breaks the standards into two different sets of standards. Urban lot splits are treated different than the 2-unit residential development. So let's just step through the 2-unit residential development. That's where a homeowner has an existing parcel, they don't split it up, they keep their existing house, because as we talked about the last meeting, there are some provisions in SB 9 that are there already around substantial demolition of existing house. So the typical scenario is that the homeowner keeps their existing house, has a backyard, and builds this SB 9 dwelling unit in the backyard and rents it. So in this scenario, then if more than one SB 9 dwelling unit is developed on that existing single parcel, then at least one of it must be designated as affordable. And so in this scenario, the city attorney can correct me if I'm misreading this, an affordable unit wouldn't be triggered. But if there's a lot split, an urban lot split, and again, that's a very specific term defined in our ordinance and in SB 9, then each lot that's created would contain one affordable unit. And what Councilmember Holliber suggested is an amendment that clarifies that if you had that scenario where you have an existing lot, you're doing a lot split to create two separate lots, then one of those, in that scenario where up to 4 units is created, would be an affordable unit. And I think that's the outcome that he's talked about, is where if you're using this to do sort of the maximum approach, as you see here, like on the bottom, the 4 units with a lot split, then one of those 4 units would be affordable. If you're just keeping your lot and you're adding 1 unit, SB 9 unit, there's no affordability requirement. But let's make sure I said that right, because again, this is pretty complicated.
I think that's.
I think that's correct.
Okay.
Yep.
And again, the affordable unit, it would be, I'd say, predominant that it's a rental unit, because again, that is that owner occupancy requirement. But if for some reason, again, using the nuances of state law, there was a tenancy in common or condominium unit, then the deed restriction carries no matter what for affordability. It's either an ownership affordable unit or a rental affordable unit, and the city has experience in both. And we can administer those affordability covenants for 55 years, consistent with state law.
Yeah, and I don't think the TICs or the condos are even feasible. You have common areas and you have reserves. I mean, it would be very complicated for anybody to construct something in that nature.
Agreed. So this is the language that we reviewed, proffered by Councilmember Holliber. And then I took a stab at crafting some amendments to the recitals. And as the city attorney mentioned, we'll take another confirmation of that and research that to be thorough. We did, as I mentioned previously, really research landslide and liquefaction zone, looking at the state agencies that map this, and we'll take another look. We do have 100-year flood zones within the city, and I actually think the SB 9 disqualifies projects located within 100-year flood zones from being qualifying SB 9 projects. But we'll take another quick look at this and clean that up in the tsunami zones.
Okay, Councilmember Holliber.
Thank you. And I don't want to make this any more complicated, but can we clarify that these units be similar in size? Like, for example, we wouldn't want somebody to have the affordable unit be like a studio, and then the market rate unit be a 3-bedroom or something like that. Or is that already covered by our current affordable housing?
Would that make a difference to affordable housing? I mean, we need affordable housing in all different shapes and sizes. With that, I think that might limit affordable housing.
Well, I'm putting it out there. I don't know. Open to hearing other thoughts about that.
Sorry, I was muted. Councilmember Pappen.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'd like to, again, this is an emergency ordinance. We're going to come back to this. So I really, if Councilmember Holliber would like to call for the question, I would second that.
And we'll have Councilmember Schneider with a comment, and then you can come back with that offer, please.
I'm trying to think of other planning commissions, not Millbrae's, that I've been watching, where other cities have made sure that affordable housing is not just something tucked into a basement or is the least desirable of the properties. So, but again, I hear Vice Mayor Pappen saying we can always come back and address that in the next time, the more specific details. But yes, I think we should be clear that we're not just creating a closet as affordable housing.
Darcy, I believe there are, under SB 9, as the state law is adopted, is there not a minimum unit size?
Yes.
And I believe that's
Yes,
800
it's
square feet.
800 square feet,
800 square
yeah.
feet.
Our inclusionary requirements for citywide affordable housing projects, we do have a provision that requires like the bedroom count to be equivalent and generally the same size. They can't designate the affordable units to be, you know, all the smallest units. But I will say we did examine your request, Councilmember Holber, and thought it just might be a little bit difficult to administer and require on a project with only 2 units. Generally, you know, if we're going to look at, again, the 4-unit project.
Darcy, I think, you know, I think with the direction of the city council, there was a motion on the floor. I think unless there's a question relative to the 800 square feet.
Actually, I did have
Go
a
ahead.
question about that. Is 800 the minimum that has to be, that a homeowner must create, or is it the minimum that a city must allow a homeowner to build?
I think it's,
Well, that's
isn't it, Darcy? I
it's
think
that any local regulations can't preclude construction of a minimum 800 square foot unit.
right.
But if a homeowner wanted to build 2 600 square foot units or something like that, would that be allowed under SB 9?
Yeah, I think you're right.
Believe so.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, I'll withdraw that then, at least for the time being, and I'll make a motion to approve the urgency ordinance with the amendments discussed earlier, the definition of 1 affordable unit per SB 9 project, and also the references to the flood zone and tsunami zones in the findings, urgency findings.
Through the chair,
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Do you have a comment, Councilmember Schneider?
Mayor, we're also in the airplane crash region. If the councilman and the vice mayor would add in being in the airplane crash area.
Can we put hazard zones?
There we go. That's good.
Okay.
Once again, staff is going to confirm all this.
We have to confirm it. I don't know if there is an official, I know that there is a geologic hazard district that we actually looked at forming back in 2000 when we did have the Crestmore slide, and we never did put such an assessment in. I don't know if there's some kind of a general reference to just hazard zones.
If I may, I would not recommend that as staff. We comply
Right.
with the airport land use plan and other elements that regulate that already.
Yeah.
I think that would be somewhat undermined by approving, the Gateway project, which is much closer to the, there's a lot more units and it's a lot closer to the land.
Okay, I'm okay with that.
Okay, so we have a
Although
motion.
the crash zone is actually the hillsides.
Okay, we have a motion. You guys, we have a motion and a second. Can we get a call for the, I'm sorry, can we get everybody's vote? Where is Eduardo? There you are.
Councilmember Schneider,
Aye.
Councilmember Holliber,
Aye.
Councilmember Fung,
Before I vote, I just want to make one quick comment. I would go for this only as an emergency ordinance, but I think, a broader discussion of all of this, it's required before we enact something more permanent. So, aye.
Vice Mayor Pappen,
It is an emergency ordinance, yes.
Mayor Oliva.
Aye.
The city council approves with amendments an urgency ordinance establishing objective standards and affordability requirements for 2-unit residential developments and urban lot splits in single-family residential zones pursuant to Senate Bill 9 by a vote of 5-0.
Thank you very much. Any other business? City manager, I'm sorry, I don't have the agenda in front of me.
No, Mayor, that concludes the agenda this morning. So thank you.
And Councilmember Fung, I apologize if I missed your hand raised. I didn't see it for your comments prior to the vote. With that being said, can we adjourn? Thank you, everybody. Have a nice weekend.
Thank you, everyone.
Everyone.